really common hiring mistake people make, and especially growing companies, is you're at 10 million ARR and you're like, I want the sales leader that's going to take us public.
It's much better to listen to 1% of 100 calls than 100% of one.
A lot of times I think people are skipping or really shortchanging the design piece, and maybe they're just using ChatGPT, being like, I need a VP of marketing at my Series A startup, which is job description B.
What does a good interview process look like for you?
I love to start with like a general 30-minute interview. And all I'm trying to decide is not like, am I going to marry this person tomorrow? But like, is this worth a 45 to 60-minute call to follow up on? Do you have the capability to operate at different altitudes? And I think the best executives are quite good at that.
Welcome to Whispered Hiring, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy Mowat, founder of Whispered. Today, I'm joined by Doug Hanna. Doug is the president at Kustomer, where he leads all GTM. It's the AI-powered customer service platform. Fascinating story and journey. They were sold to Meta, and then they've spun out, and they're doing some amazing things. Before Kustomer, Doug was the COO at Grafana, where he also helped lead the GTM side. And Doug has also had roles at Zendesk as well too. Doug, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. Happy to be talking about these topics.
Yeah, I know we met through a recruiter a while ago. It was really fun. I think it was Gia, if I'm correct, that introduced us a while ago. So I'm excited to deep dive into hiring, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, let's maybe kick it off with just before we hit record. We were talking about how do you design an executive role? I'd be curious, like, how do you think about that, and what does it take to make a executive hire successful?
I think like a lot of things, the work you do upfront matters a lot here. I think a lot of people go into hiring processes not really sure what they're looking for, and obviously reserve the right to change what you're looking for as you meet candidates and get a sense of the market. But a lot of times I think people are skipping or really shortchanging the design piece, and maybe they're just using ChatGPT, being like, I need a VP of marketing at my Series A startup, which is job description B. But I think this stuff is really important. And I guess speaking of Gia and the Cole group, like I worked with them on my first role years ago, and they have this like very interesting sort of upfront design process they do for hiring, and a couple kind of components of that I think that I've used for every role I've hired since then. One is think about the top outcomes for the role that you want the person to accomplish in the next 2 years. So I hire Andy as my head of RevOps, or anybody as my head of RevOps. What do I want them to get done in the next 2 years? Like maybe we need a systems overhaul. We need to evolve how we do our comp. Like we need whatever, like fair, kind of like executive level ready. Like it makes more sense maybe in a marketing leader. It's like, let's grow pipeline and scale our marketing team from 5 to 20 people and help us be in a position where we have the brand awareness to raise our Series C. Like those could all be like big outcomes where 2 years later you've hired this person, you're looking back and it's like, did they accomplish roughly what we thought we wanted them to accomplish? And are the priorities change? Like no one's graded on the scorecard, but I think it's helpful when you're chatting with the candidates to actually get a sense of like, okay, do we think they can do this? Do they have demonstrated experience doing this?
Yeah.
Next one, or sort of category that I really like is minimum experience threshold. So what is the minimum experience in terms of company size, market, go-to-market motion, team size, things like that? That is like the minimum of, if they don't have 1, 2, or 3, or all 3, kind of however you structure it, like they're not even worth a conversation. And that this should be like as low as you're comfortable with and as low as you think you could sell to the other stakeholders, like your board members or the rest of the exec team or something like that. It's not what you're shooting for. It's not your ideal years of experience. It's the minimum that they have. So if your your sales team is at 15 reps today, like maybe your minimum is that for what you're hiring is 20. Like you need someone who's seen at least a little bit bigger scale. Probably most of the people you'll be talking to have managed 30, 40, 50 reps. But like if they haven't managed at least 20 or 25, like it's not worth the conversation. So I really like that.
I see so many people putting on like they're a $20 million ARR company. They're like, needs to have experience up to $100 million. And you're like, okay, yes, but like the motion between 50 and 100 isn't that different. And so I think being able to, you open up a bigger aperture for more candidates when you do that. Is that the thinking you have behind the minimum side, or what drives the thinking there?
I think the thinking behind the minimum side is you're not wasting candidates that are kind of obviously unqualified. It sort of gives some focus to it, and you're not shooting for, to your point, like this like higher, maybe almost vanity metric around team size or company scale or whatever. It's more focused on like, okay, what is the minimum sort of scale? Is what most of these metrics are related to, that you need to be successful. And then the final piece of this kind of framework of designing an executive role is sort of like attributes and skills. And these are some of your more like generic sort of like, they're data driven. They're willing to get their hands dirty. Like ideally, these are culturally aware. Like if you're hiring into a more hierarchical organization versus something that's really flat, like probably your attributes will represent some differences in how that person like needs to operate or what's going to make that person successful. If it's a really technical product, like maybe you want to see some experience with like technical products or tech savviness, et cetera. So I think those are like some of the things that when I'm designing a role and I'm thinking about like the very kind of minimum of the role, like come up. And the first part being the next 2 years is really critical, because I think a really common hiring mistake people make, and especially growing companies, is you're at 10 million ARR and you're like, I want the sales leader that's going to take us public. It's like, you're probably going to have 3 or 4 sales leaders between now and then if you're lucky. Like think about what someone can do for you. Like I don't think you should make a hire unless you're going like crazy fast, unless you think that they can like work for you for the next 2 years and like be successful at kind of your reasonable assumptions of scale. If you can't see it more than 2 years, like you need to keep looking. And if you're thinking like, well, I need this person to be here for 4 or 5 years, hopefully that works out and that's a great outcome for everyone. But you risk that like what you need today is very different than what you need 3 or 4 years from now.
I love it. A guest that I just recorded earlier this week had the exact same thing. It's like, don't think about 4 years out, think about 2, because it's like so many, they're going to change, you're going to change, they may not adapt. Your growth may slow, it may accelerate. I think that makes a ton of sense. What
And
do
then
you,
I
go
have
ahead,
a
please.
final piece of, I don't know if it's really designing a role or thinking about the candidates you're interviewing for, but in a lot of companies that are growing fast, you're inevitably going to level someone. So you're going to have like a great head of marketing today, and you're going to bring in your first VP of marketing or a new head of marketing or something like that. But you want the existing person to stay. I always use the litmus test of, even if that person in the role today will be grumpy about it, will they like get it? Like, will they fundamentally sort of like understand like, okay, like I'm grumpy that like I'm being leveled. Maybe they fully get it and that's fine, and they're low ego. That's always nice. But like maybe they're grumpy that they're being leveled. But if they're like, the person we hired is pretty badass, and like I will learn from them, and like people will look at my role and kind of where I was at, and then they'll see, well, I got leveled by this person who was like pretty amazing. Like it's not like they just brought in a peer of mine 6 months from now. It's like it's a real step up. And I think that's a good litmus test, not only for managing the psychology of this employee you want to retain, but for being thoughtful about the process of like bringing someone over somebody or thinking about up leveling a role. It's really around like, okay, are you setting the bar high enough where the person who's being, this could apply if you're replacing someone too, though it's a little uglier. But the person you're leveling is like, well, yeah, I kind of get it. It makes sense. Like this person's pretty awesome. Like that's another thing I always try to think about, and it's helped people that on my teams that are leveling people on their teams be, I think, thoughtful about who they're bringing on as they scale.
The leveling's one nobody's ever mentioned, but I think it's a really important one, right? Like, how do you know when it's time to level somebody? Because it's got to be fuzzy, right? They're doing fine. Otherwise, I would just get rid of them. But where are they? How do you kind of get that sense for when people are capping out? And then how do you have that set of conversations with somebody around like, I'm going to level you? And I agree with you. Like, the done well, it can become a positive for somebody for sure. But I'd be curious how you handle those, and you don't have to give specific names, but like understanding how you've dealt with that in the past is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's a really challenging thing in a growing ideal. Like generally this is happening in successful companies, and in a growing company, people get like really emotionally bought in, and there is a category of people that are super low drama about it, and you're talking about it, maybe they even opt out themselves, they ask for it, or you say you're thinking about it and they're like, totally, I agree, it's a relief, and they're like, I just want to be a part of the company in the right role for me. Those are amazing, and like try to hire those people up front that have low ego about it. There's also like in certain companies in certain stages, you get to the point where it's like it's more important that the company does well than like your particular role, because you have a lot of equity upside, so that helps make that conversation easier. But to your sort of observation, it's rarely black and white. Like, okay, we should level this person, we should replace this person, we should let them go. A lot of it is company cultural. I think some organizations have a culture where they're constantly leveling, they're constantly hiring externally. Others, it's more the opposite, where they're really investing in people to grow. They're thinking more about how do we bring in people to help them on their teams and complement them. So it starts, I think, first and foremost culturally. And then I think you get into some of the specifics around how's their performance. And then I also like to think about how's easy or not is the role to level. And that is usually determined by like that person's skill set. So sometimes like in sales, it tends to be relatively clean. Like you run global sales now, you get leveled, you run America's sales. It's kind of like the same job in most cases, but like highly different skill set. But in marketing, if you're a kind of generalist VP of marketing and you're going to get leveled, like there's probably not a super clean place for you to go. Maybe you were the product marketing leader who got promoted to the head of marketing, and then you just sort of go back to product marketing, or you have a strong product marketing background and there's a gap there. Like the skill set sort of chess pieces moving is really important. So that's one. And then I think you have to think about and get a sense, and probably just a candid conversation with the person around like, how do you think you're doing? Like, do you feel like you're scaling fast enough, like relative to what we need? And like, how would you feel about a different role? And I've usually had, as part of that conversation, sort of a talk with them where it's, you're currently probably, and we're having this conversation, you're in the biggest job you've ever had. But like 6 months from now, you're probably going to be again in the biggest job you've ever had. In my sales example, like you're leading, we're going to put you down to America's sales, still a huge job at a hot, important company, but like, and that's smaller than your current role. But 6 or 12 months from now, it's going to be bigger than your current role. And it's going to be an even more interesting experience. And you'll get to work with this like really awesome person that we're hiring, and like learn how they do it, and see and like have a great story to tell. So I think if you're thoughtful, transparent about it, and you're hiring someone like really good, it can go over okay. Most of the experiences I've had doing it have worked out because I've tried to be thoughtful. There's some controversy too around, you let the person who's being leveled interview the new person. My take is generally yes, and I tell candidates up front, like if you're in the interview process and you seem to hate everyone and you're kind of like obstructionist about this, or like I talked to a candidate and they're like, Andy just like totally shit talked the company and said this is miserable and all that, I'm like, I'll take you out of the process.
Yeah, agree with that. Yeah.
If you go in it with an open mind, like probably you're not going to be first call, but like towards the end of the process or middle of the process or something like that, like I'm totally happy for you to meet the candidate, to share feedback. And I generally feel this about anyone on a team that's interviewing their new boss, like whether that is someone that's being leveled or their boss got replaced or whatever. I think like it requires a degree of maturity from the direct report. And if they can do it, like I really want their feedback, and assuming that like if they're in this process, I want to retain them and ensure that they feel like they're part of it. But you gotta you gotta earn the trust, and you gotta keep the trust. And if it feels like that's not working, like I told I told people on the team, like I won't keep you in the process.
I love that. I have the same. I use that same concept in many different things. Right. I'm going to share more information with you in Cascade as long as you demonstrate that you have a maturity. And the
Yeah,
second I see that you don't have that maturity, boom, you're out. Right. Like so that comes to not just what you talked about here, but lots of ways I deal with people.
I think it's important to have that conversation up front, so they realize to what you just explained, like if you handle this well, good things will come. If you don't handle it well, it's not going to end the way you want it to. It's not going to have the outcome you want it to. Just so there's like a mutual awareness there.
I love that. So this concept of builder, the builder versus and stretch candidate, I think is all the rage right now. There must be some WhatsApp group with every tech CEO out there that's like only hire builders. I talked to a person that interviewed with a unicorn CEO, and it basically just said, "Tell me what you built in AI." Da, 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 da. And they're interviewing for like a senior role. So I guess maybe my question was kind of twofold. One is, how do you think about builders versus leaders? And then the second one is, oftentimes, like a lot of people, you want people that would stretch and learn and get out of their comfort zone. And so I'm curious how you draw that line with these leveling types of conversations, right? Because in theory, when do you decide that somebody can't stretch and they need to level them versus keep stretching them and pushing them out of their comfort zone because they're a high slope type of person?
So on the builder thing, it's interesting. I think the expectations for a lot of executives has in that way have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. In some ways, it's a little confusing because if the organization you're leading is big enough, like your building is going to look or feel different than if you're joining a really early stage startup. And then I think that question is super relevant. And there are some really early stage startups that have $1 billion valuations now. So like just because of the valuation doesn't mean that it's not early stage or it's not early maturity. And some companies now, they're scaling their revenue so fast, like before the organizational maturity is there. And you're not like, you can't come in and be Mr. and Miss Dashboards and like have no idea how to do anything like you could maybe 5 years ago at a really high growth startup. So I think I would try to think of building less as, maybe at least for me, like what have you built in AI, and like do you know how to use Claude Code and things like that. Like I'm a go-to-market leader for the last 7 or 8 years. Like I think that's a little less relevant. But it is like, okay, like in go-to-market, are you comfortable like you closing a deal yourself? Are you comfortable like writing up the enablement your 3 reps that you have today are going to need, but then scale up to the 15 reps like in 6 months? Like I think of it maybe before this WhatsApp group existed, of like, do you have the capability to operate at different altitudes? And I think the best executives are quite good at that. So
Yeah.
I've worked with several executives I can just think of off the top of my head that they could do a board level strategy presentation one day, and the next day they could be in the depths of the analytics of their function and like listening to Gong calls and giving people feedback. And then like the third day they're somewhere in between. And like that, I think for any person is a really impressive skill set. And like when I hear, are you a builder? I think of it in my old man terminology as, can you operate at different altitudes, and are you comfortable digging into things yourself, getting the data you need, getting the primary source information you need, like all those sorts of things? Are you waiting for someone to come with like a McKinsey ready deck to explain the conclusions to you? And I think that is the distinction I would draw there.
I could not agree. I actually asked people that of like, can you pull your own data is one for me, right? Like the versus waiting for your analytics team. How do you get down to that deep level in your role today? Like, how do you do that?
I love Gong calls and other ways to see customer calls. Like the AI summaries and in these tools now is a game changer. Like listening to a bunch of Gong calls yourself is is very time consuming. And as someone who likes my podcasts and audiobooks, like it was definitely cutting into my time doing that. But now I can read the summary and the notes, and if it's like, oh, I'm really interested in this, like maybe I'll just listen to I'll look at the transcript quickly. Like I love that. I think skip levels and like talking to people on the sort of front lines, your frontline sellers, your frontline customer success people, those sorts of things. I think every time I have one of those conversations, I walk away with some insights. And then kind of it should have been first and foremost, but maybe most obviously is talking to customers. Sitting down with the customer, ideally outside of they're upset or you're trying to sell them something, but just a routine check-in with a customer and saying even less about how are things going with our software, but what's going on in your world? What are your other priorities? Like what other vendors are you spending time with? What's going on with your org? What does your boss care about? Like those sorts of things are, I walk away with so many good insights. And we actually have like a team is a generous description. We have a person here who does a lot of kind of like customer community stuff for us. And she's awesome at using AI to help, but delivering like super detailed notes about kind of all the conversations they're having, which are somewhat about our products and platforms and things like that, but are also just about like, what does this peer group of our buyers, coincidentally, care about? And like, what else are they spending time on? What's keeping them up at night? And that is always fascinating. And it takes like real effort and trust and investment to build a community like that. But I find that like her write-ups are some of the most efficient ways that I can kind of get in tune with what's going on with our customers too.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think Gong voice data AI has enabled leaders to get a lot deeper in there, and it's neat. It's one thing you touched on is like the ability to I remember the founder of Chorus, which was the Gong competitor. He said to me, "It's like it's much better to listen to 1% of 100 calls than 100% of one." And I had a sales team that I was working with, and I was like, how do you look at calls? And they're like, well, I just listen to 2 a week. And I'm like, oh, like, how do I have to retrain you to use AI to be able to look and find the right spots at the right points to be able to do? It sounds like you guys are doing that.
Yeah, and you can do amazing stuff too of like show me the calls where the buyer was seemingly negative about our solution or they were confused or they had a lot of technical questions. Like you can go like really deep, and it's not just like executive leaders should do that. Like encourage our product marketing team to spend a lot of time in that. Like other groups that like, again, it would like in the olden days, it would be kind of inefficient, if not impossible, to get a lot of these insights in any like reasonable way. And now someone can spend 20 minutes on it and get a lot of great insights.
That is neat. Clicking back for a second, you talked about the minimum requirements for the role, which I loved. At the same time, if you put the minimum requirements on there, I guess, and then you put it out there in the world, I guess you get a lot of low quality people thinking that they can stretch to that role. Or when you talked about this design, is this more for senior roles, which you're not posting? How do you think about putting that on there? And then, yeah, maybe I'll pause there before I dive deeper.
Yeah, I use this for senior roles, and I don't post minimum experience threshold. Even if I was posting a role, I think the hiring team should be aligned on that internally. But I would post if it's a public kind of more of like a ideal experience or something like that. And I think most people applying for jobs take those sort of loosely rather than religiously. But I wouldn't post minimum experience. It's really the for the hiring team, and some of the top outcomes you might want to massage a little bit. Like I think ideally they're actually pretty specific and measurable. You might not want to include that, and even a job description that a recruiter would share with a candidate. So you want to massage some of this, but it's really like for me, especially in the roles I've been in, the hiring I've done, like I'll write all this out. And like the first person I sort of collaborate with this on is the CEO, like who's been my boss in my last couple of roles. And like, let's get aligned. Like, do you think this is the right minimum experience threshold? Because it's a waste of everyone's time if I think it's 20 reps, but the CEO thinks it's actually 40 reps. And I've interviewed like someone that might be high potential, high slope, but we're way off in terms of what we think the person needs to do.
I think that's a really good point on the high slope. Like we actually might want to take that down a notch and be open to candidates that can push it. But you're not going to then bring somebody to the final round and someone's gonna be like, they don't look great on this dimension. You're like, no, look at those minimum criteria. Like we talked about this already. So I think setting the right expectations for the committee, however that is up front, is really important.
Yeah. I think this process works the best and works really well. And why I suspect Cold Group started it is because they don't close searches if the hiring team is misaligned. So I think they're like, let's move it up front. So like we're having these conversations before we're in market and confusing candidates and talking to people and burning our networks and all this other stuff. So I think if designing an exec role well can really accelerate your time to hire. Because instead of you're talking to a bunch of people and learning as you go, you're doing some of that hard work up front.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's your other point of a lot of people are chat GPTing job descriptions. I talked to so many people. I'm just like, literally, it's like we've done it and we've put it out in 3 different things. We're just going to learn by educating. I talked to a company today that is like, they're just interviewing all sorts of people from junior manager to like VP, and they're figuring out as they go. And I'm just like, that is just a waste of everybody's time. So yeah, makes sense.
There's something that you said, especially for founders or for execs hiring a role for the first time. You can kind of do your like little networking tour of talking to people that you legitimately are probably not going to hire. Like they're too senior or important or whatever. Like if I was the COO hiring a head of marketing to report to me the first time, I would go talk to, and I did this, like go talk to a number of marketing leaders I've known in my career, probably
Yep.
all of whom were too serious, like too important to like consider working for me at my role. But be like, so what do you think is important? Like, what's your experience at? Like, sort of tell me a little bit more about your career journey. And that's like a good information gathering, networking. I'm sure in most cases, some candidates will come out of that. These are now like people in your sort of broader professional network you can back channel with. And I think most people, especially if it's a strong connection from like a board member or somebody else in your world, or you worked with them before, I think most people are happy to take that call. And I've taken that call a bunch. And it can, I think, lead to some interesting insights. Like if you're CEO and you're going to hire a CFO for the first time, you've probably never hired a CFO. Go talk to 5-10 CFOs that are kind of at companies you admire, or companies a click or two ahead of you, and kind of learn a little bit more about the role. That way you're not figuring it out in market.
Yeah, and that's another thing actually that like we've turned into a Cold Group Love Fest, which is fun, but they hire former CROs themselves rather than people that have grown up in recruiting. And I think that makes them a lot more effective at being able to call BS on some of that stuff. So I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I think we might talk about working with recruiters, but yeah, there's definitely some pros and cons of different profiles of recruiters and where they're coming from and their experience.
What have you learned? Yeah, you before we hit record, you touched about that. Like you've had a lot of experience working with recruiters. Like what is some advice or some things you've learned?
So I typically favor specialist recruiters than sort of generic recruiters. And that doesn't mean, like in the finance example, I was working on a CFO search at a previous company. I was a peer of the CFO to be, but like I was heavily involved in the search. And like the person we hired to do the search was a relatively big firm, but they did sort of tech CFO searches all day, every day. And I love when there's a candidate list that the recruiters put in front of you and they know, like sort of personally, like 60 or 70 or more % of the people, or it's like, yeah, I placed them. They're not going to be good for you for this reason. This person's amazing, but like they're going to be really expensive. Like versus some of the generalist recruiters, like everybody can use LinkedIn and do their research and find and send messages to people. But I think there are certain recruiters in certain spaces, and this is another thing you can get from that sort of information tour. Ask those 10 marketing leaders, like, who are the recruiters that you return the calls from if they call you? And I think that's really important. I don't really think, to me, it's that important if they've been a former CRO and they're hiring a salesperson, or if they've been a marketing leader and they're hiring a marketing person. Like I index very little on that, but I do index very highly on, do they know this market and are they just sort of figuring it out? And like, are they like one of the 2 or 3 most connected people in the space? And if this person gives a candidate a call and they're a believer in our story and what we can provide, like the candidates can call them back.
I couldn't agree more. Like I get a lot of these generalist recruiters saying, "Hey, can you refer us in?" And I'm like, "For what?" Like, I'm never going to think about you again, right? Like, I know there's a guy that all he does is enablement searches, right? And it's like, when I need it, I'll call him. And
Yeah. And that's like an intentional business strategy. Like there aren't a million enablement searches going on, but like if you're the best in the world at enablement searches, like you might have a high win rate, you can command a premium for that. And that works for me. And they're just going to be so indexed on what that market looks like, what you can and can't get. Like some roles, there's so many different archetypes of the role that it's again, a generalist recruiter, I think you could waste a lot of time. I'm sure there are amazing generalist recruiters out there, but I have had much more luck personally working with recruiters that are at least reasonably specialized. Like they do sales and marketing, or they do, or they specialize in a certain sector or something like that.
yeah, I agree. It's just the way I think about it too. They're easier to remember in so many ways too. And it's like the candidates are thinking about them first when they do that. I liked your quote, which I scribbled down, was, "Who are the recruiters you return calls from?" I think that's a really good one. I thought it was perceptive. Maybe shifting gears to how you interview people. I'd be curious. I can ask specifics, but I always love to just start it generally. Like, what does a good interview process look like for you? And where do you index on evaluating candidates?
So holistically in the interview process, it depends a little bit on the role and the culture and the company. I try to give specific people in the interview process sort of specific jobs to find out. And like, if you're interviewing, like maybe we'll talk about, if the CFO is interviewing them, like here's 3 or 4 topics I want the CFO to cover. Like, let's say it's a sales leader, like partnering with finance, goal setting, understanding of sort of capacity and quota models, discount economics. I don't know, 4 random things that a head of sales and a CFO probably need to be able to talk about. Because otherwise, I think everybody just sort of regurgitates a resume. Everyone answers the same, or asks the same or 4, like same few favorite questions that they have. And it gives me as a hiring manager very little signal. I'm not usually as prescriptive of like, please ask this exact question, or please like jot down in this very specific rubric, especially if it's other execs interviewing other execs. Like they're usually going to kind of throw up on that.
I was gonna say, like, how do you keep execs on task, right? It's hard to do that, especially if it's like your boss or something like that.
Yeah. But and sometimes with the CEO, they're gonna ask whatever they're gonna ask. But I think for most of the like peer direct reports, it's like, here's some very specific things I'm trying to get that hopefully align with the areas that they're going to be interested in anyway. Like if I'm a CTO interviewing a head of sales, I'm going to want to talk about like, how do you balance like selling what we have versus getting a customer to get excited that we'll build something on spec or build it for the deal. Like these are things that hopefully they're going to talk about and work on. So I collaborate on what those questions are. And then in terms of like my own involvement in the process, I love to start, and some recruiters have yelled at me about this, but I do it anyway. I love to start with like a general 30-minute interview. Pretty much anyone I talk to, unless it's like someone I've worked with before, or that like someone we've been dying to get in front of, and it's like a board referral or something like that. I'm going to first call 30 minutes, and it's probably, depending on the role and the company and the candidate, 15 to 20 minutes of selling, explaining the opportunity, getting a sense of kind of where they're at. And then like 10 or 15 minutes of like, can I get some basic signal? And all I'm trying to decide is not like, am I going to marry this person tomorrow? But like, is this worth a 45 to 60-minute call to follow up on? And the recruiter has done a reasonably good job, or it's like a reasonably trusted referral, I have a relatively high conversion rate there. But even that gives me some signal of sort of what I need to ask in the subsequent question in the subsequent interview, which will be 45 to 60 minutes. And then I'm a lazy interviewer in this way. I don't have like a bunch of sort of like gotcha questions, or if they answer it this way, I'm going to psychoanalyze them this way. It usually starts with sort of walk me through your sort of career history, particularly as it's relevant. And then depending on the role, like let's talk about a few things that I think are going to be relevant to the role, and that are relevant to the company. So again, if we're talking about a sales leader, we're gonna want to dive a little deeper on coverage model. Like that's something I'm really interested in. I think like good sales leaders have like strong opinions on coverage model and can speak to it. If it's marketing, like let's talk about like how you've handled product launches and like some things there, and walk me through like how it is maybe different from one company to another. So those are some of the things. Like I have a couple topic area deep dives that I want to do, and then I'm always interested in why did they make a role change? And some people have like really clean resumes, or they've been at all their jobs for 4 to 6 years. It's like they got promoted 3 times and then they moved to a hotter company, etc. Most people, it's a little bit more shoots and ladders. Like they've had some great ones, they've had some short ones, they've had some wins, they've had some losses. Like in tech, it's hard to predict. Like if we had perfect batting averages, we'd all be phenomenally rich venture capitalists or private equity people.
Their batting averages are worse than ours, though.
Yeah, they have a portfolio and we don't. So we have to be, we can't parallelize 15 or 20 opportunities. So like I look for some context on kind of what the role was, what the profession was, what was good about it, what wasn't, and then why they ultimately made a change. And it's fine if they made a change that they I appreciate honesty in the conversation, and like you'll often kind of get the real story via back channel anyway. But I appreciate just sort of candor and hopefully intentionality. Or if it wasn't intentional, like I forget, this wasn't that long ago, I interviewed someone who like made a short-lived career choice, and I was like, why did you join? And he's like, honestly, they were like willing to pay me a ton of money, and like my wife and I were about to have a baby, and like I had been at a startup that didn't do well before that. I'm like, honestly, super fair. Like, I'm sorry it didn't work out, but like at least hopefully you got paid. You got paid at least, and like it was worthwhile. And like that, I appreciate that honesty, and that's totally reasonable.
And I like it. You mentioned something that prompted one. I was talking to a rockstar marketer the other day, and he basically said like people do 1/16 the diligence on their career that a VC would, right? Because if you think of it, that a VC invests in like 1 to 2 companies a year, and so they'll invest in like 15 to 16 over a 4-year period. And they'll ask questions, they'll go deep. How do you think about when candidates are diligencing with you? Like, how do you give them the space to do it? What have been some good ways that people have kind of like tried to understand the roles when they're talking to you?
I think it's a good representation of the candidate's sort of sophistication, interest, etc. Like there is a degree of, as a candidate, you need to convince me you're at least intrigued and interested for me to want to spend a bunch of time with you as you diligence the company. But I'm thinking if they are asking questions and like they have maybe like later in a process, or like walk me through a board deck or show me these metrics or things like that. I don't shy away from any of this. One of I think an obvious but strongly held conviction in hiring is like surprises don't benefit anybody. I don't want to hire someone who feels on day 2 that they were duped and sold the wrong bill of goods. And I don't want to hire somebody who's misrepresented their skills, strengths, attributes to me. So surprises are a big loss for everybody. So I'm happy to give candidates basically whatever they want and talk to them. I've had candidates asked to speak to customers. I've had candidates asked to speak to board members, obviously, people on the team. Like there are some things, again, you may be more or less comfortable on depending on the circumstances. But I think one, as a candidate, like more diligence is better. And two, as a company and as a hiring manager, like, again, speaking to executive hiring, if I'm hiring an SDR and they're like, can you walk me through a board deck? I'm going to be like, come on. But they're usually not sophisticated enough to ask that question. I'd be blown away if they did, and I would probably love it and do it anyway. But generally, they're not going to ask. So I think diligence on both sides is really healthy.
I think you're so right. I wish every hiring manager thought like you did. We've written playbooks on what are the right questions to ask. So we're hoping to train those SDRs in the future to ask those questions. but it's good. Maybe let's shift to references. I think I'd be fascinated. Everyone we talk to says it's the number one signal out there, but I'm curious how you approach references, both the formal ones and also the informal ones as well too.
References that candidates provide, I still think have signal. I have encountered a non-zero number of candidate provided references that are not nearly as positive as you would think they would be, which is just like a fail across so many layers, or across so many levels. So I do it depending on kind of my schedule, how involved other people are in the hiring process. I might like divide and conquer some of them with like the head of HR or something like that. Because usually you're going to get like a mix of like people that have reported to them, boss, board members, stuff like that. I'll always take like sort of the more consequential ones, but like we'll be thorough. Like I'll call me or someone I'm working with. We'll call every single reference that you give me. And that's one where I have a relatively structured set of questions that I like to ask. And again, some references are chattier than others. Some are more effusive than others. You'll get more signal from some conversations than others, and that's okay. So I do those, and I think they're important, and I think it's good to ask for them. And then I think the back channel references, I think are important as well. I've seen them done and try to do them across all levels and basically all roles. Most of tech is pretty small. Probably someone has worked with somebody that you're talking to, and this is like a later stage thing. And you have to be sensitive to, you're not going to back channel with somebody at the company that they're currently at. Like you don't want to back channel with a existing board member or someone else at that firm. Like there's like, you got to handle it professionally, but I think they're useful. Back channels are a little harder because you don't necessarily know how much that person worked with the other person, how well they know them. So that's when you're really looking, I think, to calibrate. And if you hear the same 3 or 4 positive things or the same 3 or 4 negative things, that's fine. I do love to ask candidates like before, like I will tell them I'm going to do back channels, and I give them an opportunity to like let me know what I think I'll hear, and like that's a good self-awareness exercise. But yeah, I'm a believer in them. I think pretty much anybody, if you ask enough questions about people who have worked with me, I'm sure you would find somebody who didn't like working with me. I've worked with thousands of people in my career, and like I think I'm lovely and charming, but I doubt 100% of them love me. So you have to like take it a little bit with a grain of salt. But if it's like, okay, this is someone you worked with closely and like you worked with them for a while, etc., like I think that's helpful.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I think your point on the non-zero and back on the formal references is fascinating. I agree. And I think people don't do enough to nurture the references before they give them. One thing you said that was different than I've heard from a lot of our other guests was you do back channels later in process. Nick Mehta had the one, he's like, I do them early in process because I want to make sure I do them before I fall in love with somebody. And so I'm curious, and I've heard a lot of people, like super senior people, be like, I do them right up front, like almost obnoxiously up front of like, hey, is this person good before I hop on with them? Like, how do you think about like where in process you do the back channels?
I want to have a chance to speak to the candidate, understand a little bit about who they are, get a sense of their story so I can calibrate it and not lead the witness a little bit. And then I'll do it. A lot of it's going to depend on sort of strength of back channel, how well I know the person I'm going to be calling, how often I'm calling that person. Like I want to be respectful of these people's time as well.
Yeah.
if it's someone I worked with closely or someone I know worked with them closely and I can like just text the person, be like, yes or no, what do you think? Great. Like I'll do it pretty early. But even then, I think I'd still want to like talk to the candidate just as a respect for the back channelers time.
I like that. It's the right way to do it. Well, I could probably ask you questions for hours on this stuff, Doug, but I know we're kind of hitting time. Maybe kind of final closing question. You've gotten really good at hiring. I'm impressed the way you're able to frame it and do that. Like, is there somebody you've learned from along the way that you've gotten good, or where did you? Is there a person that you learned how to be a good hirer from, and what shaped your philosophy?
A lot of it's definitely trial and error, having gone through hires that have worked and not worked. Um, a lot of hiring, like we hired so many people when I was at Grafana. We've hired a lot of people at Kustomer. I hired a lot of people when I was at Zendesk. A lot of that. I think in terms of like process and thinking through candidates and motivations and things like that, I think honestly the work with Cold Group has been probably the most informative for me. Like that's where I got some of like, every time I do a search with them, I jot down some like new insight around like how to approach a hiring process, and I really respect the way that they run it, and they encourage their clients to run it. So Matt Strand and Gia Cole Group, like they're really good at what they do, and I think one of the things that have made them good at what they do is they're like pretty opinionated on this. They come with data, they come with insights, and like every time I've done a search with them. Always as a hiring manager, occasionally as a candidate, but definitely more successfully as a hiring manager. I've always been impressed.
I love it. Well, Gia pops up every 3 to 4 months in my life and makes an amazing introduction. She popped up and introduced us, and we formed a good friendship. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Doug. I'm excited to share this with the world.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Andy. Really fun topics to talk about, and I'm excited that you're bringing people together to talk about these topics.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can learn. Like pattern recognition is one, but listening to people who've been there before is valuable as well too. Thanks.
Awesome.